Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session on education, training, and research enlightened by the SDGs on how to prepare a sustainable future. I'm very glad to welcome you all today, and on the stage with me we have four leading individuals in the field of education, sustainability, and research. Andreas Schleicher, who is the Director of Education and Skills at the OECD. Sylvie Faucheux, Professor in Economics and Head of the Executive Education at Inseec.U, and also leading the academic innovation. Marie-Lise Durban, International Development Manager and for the corporate philanthropy at la Fondation Orange. You're heading the award-winning initiative Les Maisons Digitales. And Romain Troublé, Executive Director of la Fondation Tara Océan. And you are leading, pioneering research on our ecosystems, on our oceans ecosystems. And you're also very active in the field of education. So thank you for being here today, despite this very particular context. I am Laure Modestie-Jubin, and I'm the founder of the Society Company and teacher at Sciences Po and HEC in the field of sustainability strategy and communication. So just as a reminder, I might need to use this. The global goals, the SDGs. So, the Sustainable Development Goals, les Objectifs du Développement Durable, were defined in 2015 by the United Nations. And there are 17 SDGs. They are a call for action by all countries to promote prosperity while preserving the planet. And against each of these goals, there are precise targets to be achieved. The goals recognize that we must collectively address a range of social needs, including education, health, social protection, gender equality, jobs, while also tackling climate change and environmental protection. And what they tell us is that all these issues and the solutions connected to them are actually, everything is actually interconnected. More importantly, they provide a true framework for transforming our world, and they can even guide us in recovering from the current crisis. Today, this is a very large subject, of course, so today we'll be looking into why these goals are relevant for education, training, and research, and where we are at with them today, 5 years after their implementation. We'll be looking at how they can be used as a very interesting framework and how they can be implemented in a practical way. And lastly, we can also look at what can we learn from what we're living today, the current crisis, and define priorities for education throughout life and research. We'll be leaving some time for questions at the end, and to ask questions, unfortunately we can't be sharing mics, so you'll need to go to the website PRODURABLE, go to the program section, find this particular session, Preparing a Sustainable Future, and click on Interaction Conférence, and I will be selecting a couple of questions towards the end. So, Andrea, let's start with you. Can you tell us the impact of the SDGs in education and skills, and also where we are at today?
Well, thank you. Yeah, first of all, if you look at around the world, you can see this growing disconnect between our economic growth imperative and the finite resources of our planet. We have divorced the financial economy and the real economy. We have that growing disconnect between the haves and the have-nots. We have a growing disconnect between the way we govern our countries and the voicelessness of people. Actually, maybe even in technology and social needs of people. The concept of GDP that we are using is, losing connection with the idea of well-being of people. And in this context, the SDGs are really a shared vision of humanity. It's sort of the missing piece of the globalization puzzle, the piece that puts all of these elements together. And now you can ask, what's the role of education? Well, first of all, the SDGs have a big role for education, but education also has a big role for the SDGs. In a way, the SDGs are a piece of paper until they become a contract with the citizens. And I think that really is born in classrooms. So in a way, educators hold the key for the SDGs to become a reality. Now, your second question is harder. Where are we? If you look at this superficially, the wording of the SDGs, we're doing fine. In a country like France, most people go to school, university, get degrees and qualifications. If you ask a bit deeper, are we getting the right knowledge, the right skills, the right attitudes, the right values? The answer will be very different. In a way, our education system succeeded quite well to develop, second-class robots. People are very good at repeating what we tell them. But, what makes us human, what distinguishes us from the artificial intelligence of computers, those are the big questions to be asked. And in a way, education in the world of the SDGs is about identity, it's about agency, it's about purpose, it's about building, curiosity, opening minds, it's about compassion, opening hearts, and it's about our capacity to do something. The SDGs are not about, words, they are about behavior. Can we mobilize our cognitive, social, emotional resources? And you ask those questions, I think we have a lot of work to do, starting from the very early years up to, learning through our lives. And the irony is that actually many of the most important skills around the SDGs and values are built in the earliest years of our lives, particularly when it comes to social and emotional skills. And empathy. You can develop this as a skill for a 3-year-old. Later in life, these things become very quickly personality traits. So I do think we have to rethink the way in which we educate people to be better prepared for this in a way. And I think there's a real risk that we look at this in a very superficial way just by looking at degrees and qualifications.
Right, and so you're saying there's still a lot to be done. How can in a way, well, let's say, how can this framework be a wonderful support, when it comes to helping, educators and people who are working in executive education or in research. How can it?
Actually, I think a lot of this is already happening. You can see good examples of this in France. I think teachers working more across the boundaries of disciplines, helping students to look at problems through different disciplinary lenses rather than just, work in a silo of a subject. So I think the interconnections you can see in the SDGs are becoming sort of developing a more cross-curricular format. Some of this is happening in the learning environments. I think students are increasingly learning in the real world rather than just, in the abstract world of the classroom. Sometimes enabled by technology, sometimes by more experiential learning. So I do think the SDGs are starting to have an impact on the way we, teach, the way we learn. But it is still very modest, and unfortunately it happens mostly in elite schools, schools for, parents who care about those things, whereas, the children who need that actually most still get the least out of that. No?
Mm-hmm. Sylvie Faucheux, you are heading executive education at Inseec.U, and what is your view of the recent evolution in education and sustainability, and have the SDGs been useful, or at least even visible, in structuring transformation and change?
With SDGs, there are many different facets. Certainly, with goal number 4, there is a challenge of quality of education. and more particularly education and for sustainability. But in fact, there are other dimensions as well. And higher education institutions themselves need to address the performance as economic, societal, and territorial actors. This means, for example, the environmental dimensions of universities' performance, which relate to SDG number 6, water and public health, number 7, clean energy, number 12, responsible consumption and production. That means that we have to rethink the evaluation and the accreditation system applied to higher education and research establishments. The full spectrum of SDGs should be integrated into the ways that institutions are evaluated and ranked, and this is not the case today. With that, it is very hard to get change as institutions are not willing to give up their ranking. There are some, there are some examples of rankings that mainstream sustainability. For example, in the United States, the H stars, or at the international level, the green metric frameworks give weight to teaching and research engagement for sustainability and to performance, for example, on water, energy, and waste management in university. But these are not the most influential rating system. For example, at Inseec.U, we are leader in green metric ranking, but it's not very useful for the others ranking. In terms also of learning and content, too often the approach is too generalist when it comes to SDGs, and it is perceived only as general culture in most often. And in fact, it is not yet widely accepted that the SDGs can be a reference framework for comprehensive strategies of higher education, excellence, including environmental performance, social justice, and territorial partnership. And in fact, we have today only traditional educational quality and research output goals. The different dimensions are complementary and can be pursued. This is not yet enough thinking and advertisements around the new jobs and new skills associated with the ecological and the energy transition. And it's very difficult, even when you propose this case of new programs. For example, at Inseec.U, we propose a specific executive education program on ecological and energy transition. But in fact, we have very few people because it's a very good program in partnership with a very famous university in Canada, for example. But in fact, for executive, it means also for enterprise. It's not yet very well taking into account. It's just interesting sometimes for young people, but not for really for enterprise. We see that, and not really also for executive. So education informed by the SDG is not just about general culture. It's about transforming the what we teach, the why we teach, and the way we teach. And fundamentally referring that to the point of Andreas, this put into question the purpose of education and how we educate people for tomorrow's society.
Thank you. Yes, Romain, to you, how and why have the SDGs been useful to you? Why did you take them on in the way you work, in the way you present your activity? How have they been useful? What impact?
Well, hello everyone. I'm managing indeed a foundation, and a few months after the SDGs was launched, we try to make the exercise what we do and what we don't do with our foundation as a group of people. Because in fact, all these values that you can see here, they are kind of a response to globalization. It's a globalization of values. How can we all have the same framework to deal with? And what we discovered when we did this, we discovered some things that we never addressed so far. It showed us what we missed in our strategy, the way we behave. In fact, it's the way we behave every day as a foundation, and also in our daily lives, personal. It's also helped us to have a common language with partners. We know in science, for a long time, in all our economy, we really work in silos. And these SDGs here are here to break the silos, try to address and tell us that we have to break these silos, to work together, to make partnership, to find solutions. And this is the way we have a common language to address these issues. When we talk SDGs, we talk the same language about the values, what is important in life, what is not important. They are very detailed in targets when you can really focus your activity. What we did with our activity, we were able to measure the progress, we can able to measure it, to be able to manage it in the end. That's one. And so for education, we developed a program called Eco d'Escale, where we've been with Tara, the sailing ship, we've been in 60 countries in the world over the last 10 years. And we take an artifact from every country. It could be copper in Chile, it could be sugarcane in Brazil. And we build on this artifact, we build all the SDGs, as much as possible, to address the question raised by this artifact. By copper, for instance, you can imagine everything you have behind. To address this question of SDGs through the artifact for the kids, it's pretty. They can hold it and they can understand what we talk about as something that they can see and smell and touch. This was very important. And so in research, it's also helped us a lot to explain why these research are important, on which values are they important. And if you look at what did the CNRS, they did their homework. They tried to address the SDG strategy to the work. First, it is just a work to put in these different colors what they do. The next step will be how the strategy of CNRS will evolve to reach all these goals in the coming decade. And I think it's really important more and more in the world where we go. We have discussions about this. I mean, 2 years ago, no. 3 years ago, no. I think we have seen some progress about it, but of course, it's far away from making the case. Yeah. A lot to do there. And I'm sure it should be the SDG 2050, in fact.
Okay, now let's look now into how the SDGs can be used, in a practical way as a framework and implemented in that way. Marie-Lise, so one of the main ambition at Orange Foundation is digital literacy, especially for youth and for women, which you see as the gateway to equal opportunities in education and for the job market. Can you tell us how you embrace the SDGs and the way they structure or will be structuring your approach for the future?
With pleasure. Hello, everybody. Really happy to be able to talk to you today. We launched the Women's Digital Center program, which in French is called Maison Digitale, back in 2015. And really, truthfully, at the time, we didn't make any connection with SDGs. Okay, we were more basing it on our previous experience, particularly in Africa, working in education and maternal and infant health programs. So, because we realized that these women, to empower them economically, it was really important to give them digital tools and digital skills, whereas all of the NGOs we were working with, nobody was asking us to do it. And we just thought, well, why aren't they asking us? I mean, it's kind of a disconnect, whereas we had started working in those areas in France and Europe. So we launched the program based on 3 pillars: providing digital equipment, providing educational content in a digital format, free of charge, of course. All this is free of charge for the participants. And also mediation assistance. Obviously, you can't just give people equipment and content. You have to help them out. So these are the 3 pillars of our program, like all of our digital education programs at the foundation. And what was our inspiration? It was in 2019 that we won a trophy, which was really incredible. It's called the SDGs SDG Trophy, and it was the first edition. And we got the trophy in New York at the United Nations. And G's, if you're not familiar with it, it means gender, equality, European, and international standard. And a lot of companies in France and Europe try and get that standard to show that they're really motivated and have put in place programs and activities to guarantee this gender equality. And that was what changed our approach to the SDGs, to be quite honest. And that's where we realized that this was going to be a lever for us to communicate, in particular with our stakeholders, with the participants, with our partners, and even with our employees who are getting more and more involved in our volunteering programs. So today we are linked up, let's say, to really 4 goals, I would say, in terms of SDGs. So, of course, number 4, quality education, but also no poverty, the number 1. Also, we're working, obviously, gender equality, because this program is for women. And also partnerships, because those are key. We have a network of Orange Foundations in all of the countries where we work. So they're our number 1 partners, but then they have local partners, for the most part, public institutions as well as NGOs. And we do work a little bit with UN Women in one of the countries. So this program is in 24 countries now of our Orange footprint, mostly in Africa, but also Middle East and Europe. But half of our 320 women's digital centers are in France. So mainland France, but also Reunion Island, Mayotte, and in the Caribbean, okay, and French Guiana. So why are the SDGs useful to us? Because, as I said, they speak to NGO partners, to our stakeholders. It helps us communicate our strategy. It helps us to measure also our activities, our impact. And it strengthens the link to our employees. And actually, what we were really proud that the fact that we got involved, that we started talking about SDGs inside of our group, that this participated in motivating our group to decide to take the SDGs, take a look at them, on the business side as well as the philanthropic side.
Yeah, so beyond the foundation.
Beyond the foundation.
Orange Group, oui.
Exactly.
Okay. Thank you. And so you're basically saying something very similar to what Romain was explaining, is the fact that these SDGs allow us to share not only a common vision for the future, but also a common language. And this is a great help to connect to and to improve together.
Definitely. Half the battle is in the defining of what are the terms, what does this mean, what is what exactly. So we've won half the battle with the SDGs.
Okay, Andreas, back to you. The OECD has actually developed a series of programs to help implement the SDGs in a very practical way in the field of education and skills. Can you tell us more in detail about the 2030 programs and their aim actually to develop this common language for teaching and learning for the 21st century? What programs?
Yeah, in fact, the SDGs have inspired us to think much harder about the question of what we should teach and learn. There's a lot of discussion and debate in education about the how, the methods, the pedagogy, the institutions. we rarely ask ourselves, why is it what we learn? No? We all studied trigonometry in our schooling at some point. No? If you actually ask yourself, why do we teach this? If you go to a mathematician, they will tell you, well, that's just one application in maths. That's not really the essence, the heart of mathematics. If you go to the engineers, they will tell you, well, actually, you don't need that. Computers do that so much better now. The reason why we teach that in school today is because, 300-400 years ago, we needed that to measure the size of our fields. But then generation after generation, we thought, oh, it's really important we teach that. And that's the reason why our schools have become a mile wide, but just an inch deep. We teach so many things at so many shallow levels of depth. So what we actually started to do is, with the SDGs, what is the heart? How can we teach fewer things at greater depths? And we looked at the SDGs, what they mean in terms of human competencies. Our capacity to navigate ambiguity, our capacity to build something of intrinsic positive worth, our capacity to mobilize action, our capacity to sort of manage and resolve conflicts. Can you think for yourselves? Can you work with others? And we started to actually build a kind of shared framework around this. And what was amazing to me is how quickly that has taken hold. It's now, being used in 60 countries. And we have a lot of young people actually helped us develop that vision. Actually, one must say, sometimes we had ministers of education sitting around a table listening to, 10, 15-year-old young people who had actually very good ideas of what it means to be human in the time of the SDGs. So that's been sort of one contribution. We are now starting with that second challenge. How do you will never improve what you cannot somehow make visible and measure. No. And that's where the SDGs become really, really difficult. So we have, some of you may know our PISA assessment. Every 3 years we measure, how well students do. And we've introduced some of those dimensions in the PISA assessment. One we call global competency. If you drink a coffee here in Paris, do you understand that could have implications for the work of people in South America? Can people think about global interconnectedness? No? Can they appreciate different ways of thinking? No? Work with people who are different from you, who think differently from you. We are all born with, binding social capital. We like people who are like us, who look like us, who come from our families. But actually bridging social capital is very, very hard to build. It takes really hard efforts in education and to work with people who are different from you, who appreciate their ways of thinking. So we've started to make those dimensions visible in our PISA assessments. Hopefully it will give educators some idea of how well we are doing. I think the reports you do on the SDGs actually are very, very sobering. If you actually take the SDGs serious, we are at the very, very early beginning. Now our world is so fragmented, and this kind of unifying vision, and I think as Romain said, language, I think is still quite far from our realities. Even among young people, we see the Greta Thunberg summer, but if you actually ask the average, 15-year-olds about their views, they're often very much siloed. And technology has actually made a lot of this worse. Technology, again, makes you speak with people who think like you, who look like you, who work like you. It actually makes it harder for people to engage with the different facets of our work and understand the connections. But, that's, I think, our work on Education 2030. I must say I've been very, very, much surprised and encouraged by how this is being taken up by students, by schools, by education systems around the world.
Okay. Now, let's look now at let's say today, because these global goals give us a vision on the long term and for the future, but the crisis that we are going through today is also shifting the way that we can look at the future. Romain Troublé, according to you and in the way you look at the world, what has this crisis revealed, and does this change some of the priorities that we should have in terms of research and education?
I don't know for you, but for me, for my generation, it's the first time we are facing a single issue in the world. No one can escape. This COVID issue is all over the place. Any connection with businesses, any partners in the rest of the world has the same problem that we have here in Paris. And this is the first time ever that my generation is facing this. We never knew war as Europeans. And I think this is a very mild preparation for what could happen in the future if we don't care about climate change, biodiversity loss. We see really, we are facing all together as mankind an issue that we can't solve. And nothing we can do to solve it today. I mean, for the last year at least. So I think this is accelerate, maybe, I hope it will accelerate the way people think about why we're here, what is the meaning of all this, what I'm doing for them, for the kids, but also for the grandparents, for all over the place. I think this is a chance to reflect on these issues, and I really try to push this at least everywhere I go. And I think one day I showed my daughter, 8 years old. I showed her the SDG that you see here. I showed her this one, the SDG pyramid of happiness. And she, in fact, she understands everything she's on, because the small design, the color is fantastic. She likes colors, you know. And then she understands now there is poverty in the world. And then she understands there's some people who have not decent work. And then they understand there is a problem with gender. What is it? And they ask questions. It's really a nice way to talk about, to take some high latitude. I don't know how you say it in English. To step back and see, wow, what are the big issues on this planet? What I need to understand as a kid. Simply, with your parents, explaining what we can understand about this in a few sentences. And it was a nice game, and we play a game, and then she tried to color each strategy she can do again, and it's easy to do. And she I think this day, she never asked the same questions than before. Kind of another view of our world and the way we go in the future together. That's what, for me, I would say.
And on one particular point, do you think this crisis could help us in a way really rethink our relationship with nature, or help us integrate, for example, the concept of global health?
Yeah, I think we all see the issue we are behaving in the world. We are gaining on nature every day. When you talk about nature, it shows that we are not part of nature. When we put a name on nature, it shows that we are not part of it, but we are part of it. We see that a small microbes, 0.2 microns, is able to put down the world, the world economy, I mean. And I think this is to understand that what we do to nature is coming back to us. There is not our health and the health of the nature of the planet. There's only one health in this planet. And we are all together in the same problems, in the same successes. And I think this is kind of a thing that this global health has to be in the mindset of the future. Because in France, at least, everything you do to learn why people are changing their behavior, the number one reason they change the behavior is then when their health is affected. And when you understand that everything you put in nature, plastic, chemicals, whatever, CO2, this is coming back to us every day, every second we breathe, then you can start to think, okay, this is all together, we have to take care of this because this is taking care of us. And the ocean is really our life support systems, and it's really like the reason why I work a lot and give my life to study this ocean and try to share it as much as possible.
Thank you, Romain. Marie-Lise, to you, in your view, what does this crisis reveal, and what would you like to prioritize?
It has really been a revelation to all of us who have been working from home that we absolutely need to have internet access. You know, I mean, digital is absolutely essential for business, for pleasure, for everything during this kind of a crisis. And it was a huge revelation also that all of our women's digital centers in France had to close, okay, because of course respecting lockdown and so on. And these women have no equipment at home, so many of them could not continue with their homework, let's say, and continue working on their digital skills development. And their kids obviously could not connect either to continue their education at a distance. So their entire families were ostracized by this whole thing, and not just in France, but in many countries. So that's been a big revelation, I think, for everybody. What we're doing about it is we're adapting our programs, all of our programs, saying that, okay, we can't just have, physical workshops anymore. That's what that was our standard. We're going to have to do blended now, and we're going to have to equip these women at home, because otherwise they're not going to be able to continue at a distance. And we're also going to work on, obviously, the educational content, putting some of it online so that they can do it at a distance, and also working on the aspect of training our trainers that were surprised by this crisis and didn't right away have the knowledge of the different applications and what's the advantage of this one compared to this one. I can only go up to 20 people on it, and then this one is we have to pay for it, and et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, we're working on all of those aspects to prepare for the future, because more and more is going to go online.
And telling us that education is not just a place.
Exactly.
As well, yeah.
Exactly.
Andreas, what would be your concluding thoughts on this, and what the crisis has revealed and prioritized, perhaps?
Well, if you think about it, 1.5 billion young people around the world have been locked out of their schools. That's a dramatic experience, and for those who have, learned how to learn, who have great parents and great technology, maybe that's been liberating and exciting, much more interesting than sitting in the classroom. But for the vast majority of young people who used to be, spoon-fed by their teachers, not the right technology, this has been a devastating experience. And I think there are two things that I take away from this. First, learning is not a place, but an activity. No? It is not really where you are, it's what you do. And the second thing is, learning is not a transactional phenomenon. That's why digital learning hasn't really worked. It's always a relational phenomenon. What students will remember from this is that, who was the teacher who reached out to you? Who understood your dreams and passion? Who understood your difficulties? How did they help you? Where you do have, and that's, I think, also sometimes the bitter experience for teachers, who teachers thought, oh, my children are all present, I can just tell them something and tomorrow they will have learned that. They have seen, well, actually, if I do not know my students really well, I've lost them. I cannot connect with them. So I think this has been a really deep transformation. The positive, the results, of course, are really damaging, but the positive side from it is that we have seen not just more technological innovation, but also more social innovation in education in the last 6 months and then in the last, maybe 20 years.
Very interesting. So bringing back humanity as well in education, purpose and humanity. Sylvie, to you, what would be your view on this and your concluding words on the changes that we've been living lately?
The crisis has revealed many limits of traditional pedagogy, and I really think that it's going to accelerate change in this field. But we have also shown the limits of digital solutions that have up until been applied. And it's very interesting because we have organized some surveys with our students. And it's very interesting to see that they are not against digital solutions, but they ask for more forums, more exchange, more collaborations. They are, in fact, they want to be active learners. It's a very new concept, I think, and it's very close to the SDG number 17, Partnership for Goals. And it is a big challenge for higher education institutions to organize that. Also, we have seen also that the crisis has accelerated the need for skill sets for ongoing and future societal challenges, such as SDGs reflect them. And I think it will be very useful to reintroduce forward studies in our research and pedagogical work. Forward studies, and I can see participative forward studies are very well developed, for example, in universities in Netherlands, for example. And I think it could be very useful to put around the table academic, but also students and also people from different fields such as culture, art, policymaker, and so on, to build scenarios to visualize the future and to explore some solution, source of divergence, and so on, to help to propose new research programs very focused on the needs for society, such as SDGs propose, but also for develop new programs, but not only for content, as I said, but also how to organize, to propose the pedagogy, the form of pedagogy. And this is why, for example, at Inseec.U, we organize for the in October a research seminar on the impact of the COVID crisis on the pedagogical system. And we are very interested to develop, in fact, responsible innovation and responsible pedagogy. And it's a big challenge for us together. And it's very interesting.
Thank you. I think we can. Well, I've got a couple of questions that have come in here. One interesting question, we were talking about universal values. May we consider that SDGs are a frame based upon the Western culture and leadership of the world? Would the SDGs still be applicable under the Chinese cultural leadership, or in the case of a chaotic situation without any world leadership? So do you think it's the Western world imposing something, or is this really emerging from something that comes from, you know, all the countries that have voted? Maybe it's different. We don't know.
I'm not familiar with China, but in Africa, these SDGs are clearly speaking to the countries there.
Yeah.
So there's no hesitation at all. I don't think that it's an issue.
Okay. Interesting.
Yeah, I would also say that, you know, the SDGs have been developed collectively by the countries of the world, and they are probably the only shared language and shared vision that we do have at this very moment. You know, most of our institutions are put into question, but I do see the SDGs really as providing a framework that works across cultures, across languages, across nations, and I do think it's very, very important, particularly in terms of the values. You know, people who don't have a floor under their feet, like, you know, the SDGs, they're going to build walls around them. No, I think this kind of common shared idea is very important.
Okay.
Just a point for China. In fact, there are a lot of programs which are developed, but only on environmental SDG, not in the part of social part of SDGs.
Yes, indeed. Now maybe I'll combine two questions that we received here. How do we push and mainstream the SDGs even more? You know, to go beyond, even detach from all party or government or international, you know, or specific national leadership, so they can really help in measuring quality and building recognition, such as PISA, for example, or ratings or accreditation, as you were talking about? How could we push this forward even more for them to be the meta framework? Yeah.
I think the director of higher education institutions have to work together for that. There are some they can push that on public sectors. I think it must be an international organization, but if it's not pushed by universities, by leadership at the universities, at the national level, but also at the international level, it will be very difficult to change, because it's a long time ago. For example, in France, president of university or director of management school ask for that, but it's not well organized, and nothing is changed.
Okay, well, thank you very much. I think our time is up. Thank you all for your contributions. Still a lot to do, but also many positive changes are underway as well. I wish you a very good evening and a great day also for tomorrow if you are back at PRODURABLE. Thank you again, and bye for now.
Okay.